Hey sewing friends, Chelsea here from Sew Simple Home. Today's project is a quick home decor kind of quilting project. We are going to make ourselves kind of a springy summer table runner, and we're going to do that by using the quilt as we go method. So we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. So I'm going to move my machine off to the side here so we can see. So to start off with, you can make your table runner whatever size you want. If you want to make it a rectangle, great. If you want to make it a square, great. Whatever you want to do. My suggestion is that you decide the measurements that you want and then add about 2 inches to the length and 2 inches to the width. And that's going to be your base here. So this is my base for my table runner. I'm going for about a 30 inches by 15 inches table runner. And then on top of, so this is the wrong side of my base that's facing up. And on top of that base fabric, I'm going to put my batting. And I am using Warm and Natural. That's what I like. You can use something else. Really, it's kind of up to you. And my base fabric here is going to be about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch wider and longer than what my final measurements are going to be, because I'm going to trim down the whole thing for this project. Okay, so that's kind of how I start. Now, if you have a basting spray, you most definitely could use a basting spray between your 2 layers. I'm not going to worry about it too much. All I'm going to do is put a pin or 2 between my layers here to just kind of keep them in place as I quilt as I go. Now, the one thing that you need to do when you're doing the quilt as you go method is it's best to start in the middle. So I have these fun strips of kind of blues and greens. I got this kit in my Annie's holiday quilt club. I don't even remember what the design was that they wanted you to use, and I'm not using that. I'm just using these strips. So my first strip is this cute kind of bicycle material. It's super cute. I'm going to put it right kind of in the middle of my table runner, and then I'm going to take my second piece that's going to go next to it, and I'm going to place them right sides together, and I'm just going to match those raw edges. So this project is actually very, very good for using up your scrap fabrics. If you have an old jelly roll, if you have just strips of fabric, but quilting as you go is a great method to use that. Now you can keep it very consistent, so like all of my strips are the same size here, or you can have them wider or thinner, and it adds a little character to it. But it's totally up to you. So I'm just going to kind of move this off to the side so that I can get my machine set up. So I have my piece in the middle, the right sides together. I'm just going to put it in my machine here, sewing at 1/4 inch all the way down. And I'm just going to kind of roll this guy here a little bit just so we can get it in our machine. So with this method, it's literally like quilting as you go, right? It's going to put the design through all the layers. Okay, cut my thread here. You can kind of see there's the design. Now all I'm going to do is flip this over, take my little iron, and press that seam over, just like that. Okay, and then I'm going to go for my next layer. And layers are falling over. So my next layer is this fun kind of green paisley fabric. Just gonna line it up there. Again, if you wanted to, you most definitely could pin it in place. I'm not going to. I'm just putting it on there. Sewing at 1/4 inch. Just making sure it lines up. All the way down. So you can move it as you go. Okay. Snip. Okay. And then press it over. Okay, so we've got 3. Now let's do the 4th one. Right sides together. Put it in the machine. Press it over. Now for this project, I really like this Cricut Easy Press Mini because I can press it right here on my table and I don't have to worry about getting up and going to my iron every 2 seconds. But really, it's totally up to you. Whatever works is just fine. I'm gonna do this darker one here. And there's no real rhyme or reason. I kind of put them in an order just so that I kind of had darks and greens, you know, separated a little bit. But you can do whatever works. I used this method to make some stockings this last Christmas, and that was actually really kind of a fun way to do them, so they kind of have that quilted look without me having to quilt them. So I'm just going to keep adding new layers. And then we'll come back and I'll show you how I'm going to do the other side. We have one side done. You can see here. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But it looks pretty, and that's what we want. So now we're just going to turn it around like this, and we're going to go the opposite direction. And I'm going to pretty much do the same pattern. We started with the bicycles in the middle, and I'm going to just pretty much do the same pattern the other way. You don't have to do that. You could just do completely random the whole time. But I kind of like this idea of it being partially symmetrical. So we're going to try it out and see how we feel about it. But to start, I'm actually going to roll up this opposite side a little bit, just so it'll give me a little bit more leverage as I'm sewing, so I feel like I don't have fabric everywhere. And then same thing here, you can kind of roll up this side as well. Let's pull our machine back in. Make sure you can see it well enough. And then I have all my fabric layers here. Let's see if we can lay them flat. So I'm just going to start again with this plaid, just putting it down in the middle. Roll this up a little and start sewing. there's our first section. Just pressing it to the side like we did on the others. I like that with the two plaids on the side. All right, now we're going to do our green paisley on top of that one, and we'll just keep sewing until we get to the very end. Here is our finished Quilt As You Go table runner. So all the pieces have been quilted, and this is the front, obviously. Here's the back. It's a little bit of a mess. Need to cut some threads, but we're not going to do that right now, because what we're going to do is we're going to trim it down to size now. So the first thing that we're going to do, I told you I kind of want it to be about 15 by 30. So I'm going to start up here at the top, and I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line up my fabric. Let's see, let's go with the 28. And we're going to trim all that off so we can kind of square everything off. So that's my first side. I'm going to flip it this way. And then we're going to trim off this side. Let's see. Trim about right here. Move mine up, trim the rest of that off. Okay, so we've kind of squared that off. So now I'm going to come here in the corner, line things up, top and the side. Here's my 30 inches over here. Square that off. And then my 15 inches is right here. To there. Okay. So that's kind of what it looks like. Isn't that nice? All squared off. So now we're going to finish it by adding bias tape. The next step in making this Quilt As You Go table runner is adding the bias tape to finish out the end binding. So I just made my own bias tape. I will link, put a link in the description so that you can see how to create your own bias tape. It's actually very, very simple, and you can just use materials that you have on hand at your home, or you can go out and find something that's matching. But for this week, I've kind of got this kind of cream bias tape, and this is 2.5 inches wide, and then I've just ironed it in half. So what we're going to do is, this is one of the long sides of the table runner, and I'm just going to place my bias tape right in the center here, just like that. And now we're just going to add it with sewing. So I'm going to start here. I'm doing 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, so my fabric meets up right at the edge, forward and back, and I'm just keeping my bias tape right on that edge. Now once I get to the corner here, just before the corner, I'm going to stop and cut my thread. And now I'm going to show you how to miter the corner. And we have a whole video on how to miter corners, so if you need a little bit more help, you can go check that out. But here is my edge. I'm going to pull my bias tape up at an angle and then bring it down at that angle. And then I'm going to stitch down. Okay, so that's how I'm going to close off that corner. So I'm just going to put this whole thing right here, 1/4 of an inch, forward and back stitch, follow along at the end, stitch almost all the way to the corner, lift, cut my thread. So it's going to look something like that. I'm going to put my bias tape, I'm going to fold it back at an angle, and then I'm going to bring it forward at that same angle, like this. And then I'm going to start stitching. And keep sewing. And again, a lot of people will get really frustrated with binding. I know I have for a long, long time. But you don't need to. Just do it. Like, it's handmade. It's not going to be perfect. You're going to mess up. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with it having a few imperfections. That's just part of sewing. It's part of quilting. That's what makes things handmade. So I think that's one thing to really think about. Is you don't have to be perfect to make a beautiful item or something that you love. You just have to try. Alright, one more corner. Alright, now we're coming towards the end, so I'm going to just trim off the excess here. I'm going to pull this part of my bias tape back. And I'm just going to sew. Alright, so I stopped a couple inches from the edge here. So I have these two sections. So now I'm just going to kind of meet them in the middle. I'm going to put a pin through it. I'm sure that there's an easier way to do this. I don't know what that is. And then where my pin is where I'm going to stitch. Just going to stitch straight across. Open it up, make sure it lays pretty flat. And then we're just gonna stitch across. Where we ended on the opposite side, close it off, just like that. There you go, that's kind of what it looks like. Now our corners, you can see, will fold over very nicely and give a nice pointed corner, and that's what we want. So now I'm just going to take my little iron here, press that bias tape up in all the directions. That way we can turn it just a little bit easier, a little bit smoother around to the opposite side. So now what we're going to do is turn it and turn your bias tape to the opposite side. Pin it in place. And now if you need to, if some of your material is too thick to fit inside the little bias tape, then you most definitely can trim it down, like the corners. I always like to trim them down. So we'll trim off some of that corner just to help so it's not so thick, because you're going to have to sew it. And the best way to do that is to hand sew to get the best mitered corners, but that just depends on your preference. If you want to hand sew, you can run this through the machine for sure. I've done it before on little table runners. Nothing wrong with that. It just definitely has a different look, right? And it may not be as clean looking. To finish this, you could also, the hand stitch that I prefer to use if I'm doing binding is called a slip stitch. And I'll link, I'll put a little link so that you can watch our video on how to do the slip stitch. It's just the cleanest. It will ensure that your binding, you don't see it. You won't be able to see the stitching. It's kind of an invisible stitch, which is nice. And you can just see at the corners here, I'm just kind of folding one side over and then the other. So it's kind of mitered, right? It gives it that little angle, so it kind of points and squares it off, I guess you could say. Which is what you want, right? You want it to be clean and professional looking, like you bought it at the store, even though we know you didn't. And I'm just trimming some of the excess so that it looks nice and clean. Now I used a 2.5 inch binding. You could definitely go with a 3 inch or a 4 inch if you wanted a larger binding on the outside. Again, that's totally up to you, to what you want, the look that you're going for on your table runner. So you can choose for yourself the thickness of your binding. Nothing wrong with that. It's kind of fun sometimes to have a thin binding, and sometimes it's nice to have a nice thick one, and that kind of might depend on where you're putting, like what table you might be putting your table runner on. But I'm just going to keep, like I said, I'm just trimming some of this bulk off so that we can get that binding around. Trimming those corners down a bit so they're not as bulky as well. Alright, we're almost there. Just a couple more inches here, so a few more pins. Put in. Last one here. Go this way, see if we can't get it to lay a little flatter. Okay. So that's kind of what it'll look like. So it'll have a thin binding around the outside of it. And like I said, you can put this in your machine and stitch it. You can hand stitch it all the way around. It just depends on the look that you want and the details that you want. And here is our finished table runner. How pretty is that? Super simple. Got the binding on, quilted back. So it's just as simple quilt as you go. Nothing amazing and special or difficult. Just starting in the center and working